Hello, everyone, and welcome to a conversation with Digvijay Lamba, who is the current Chief Technology Officer at Alteryx. Welcome, DV, as you are fondly called. Welcome to the discussion.
Thanks, Arshad. Thank you for having me. Such a pleasure to be here. This is an area of it's an area of interest for me and something I think about all the time. So happy to give my thoughts.
Thanks a lot. We are excited to have this conversation with your rich, illustrious background. You have worked at some of the most marquee names in the industry and also in Silicon Valley. Plus, you've also been a founder of a startup yourself that was very successfully bought by Alteryx, and you're currently the Chief Technology Officer. So it would be great to maybe start with DV, if you can just introduce yourself a little bit, give your panorama of your career, and then we can get into the specific discussion.
Yeah, so like you said, I'm currently the Chief Technology Officer at Alteryx. We are about 600 engineers, 650 engineers. We're a global team spread across, many different countries. We have, and like many other companies, trying to understand how AI and other things are impacting how a modern engineering organization is really built and run. I came to Alteryx through an acquisition of a startup that I founded called Lore.io, which was in a similar data analytics AI space. And so my career, you can think of it as kind of I've been in startups, so done startups, eventually got acquired, and then been in larger companies. I was at Walmart where I drove some of their platform initiatives, and then now at Alteryx. So, I love building software, but recently my focus and my passion has been around modern engineering and how fascinatingly in the last 5 years or even in the last 10 years, engineering has changed so much and the way engineering organizations work has changed so much. So that's what I'm super interested in these days.
I love the way you called it modern engineering, which is true because I think things are changing so rapidly. So maybe we could start with that, DV. What are, in your view, some of the big macro disruptive trends? I mean, AI is obviously everybody's talking about it, but in general, from a technology perspective and specifically around platform engineering, I think that would be a good perspective to have from you.
Yeah. I think maybe I'll mention one broadly and then jump into the platform area. I think to me, the main thing that has changed in engineering is increasingly engineering leaders need to be operational leaders and not just kind of what I call delivery leaders. You can't just be delivering features. You need to care about what you're building end to end. You need to have business and outcome in mind. And you really need to understand the 360-degree impact of anything you do. And when you take that to platform engineering, right, I think increasingly what I find is it's really important to think of platform as a product, right? With the internal teams as your customers. And if you start thinking about these teams as your customers and you having a roadmap, having kind of, measuring your success in terms of the speed and velocity and the experience you're providing to the people who are using your platform, the way you start to think, changes. And one of the key things that, we have discussed outside of this as well is, how do you make the teams that are depending on your platform more self-service so they're not bottlenecked by you? But at the same time, how do you provide the right amount of governance so it's not complete chaos in terms of what they're building? So this kind of push and pull between centralizing everything into the platform team versus giving more and more control to the to the application teams completely change is different for every company, and finding the right balance is really important, and measuring that you found the right balance and you're providing the right amount of flexibility and control to each team is super important. And so that's one big area that is kind of changing how platform engineering is done these days, right? And of course, secondly, you're with Dora metrics and other things, you can be much more measured and outcome based in how you're running and building out your infrastructure and platform. And you want to be much more automated. It's not just, continuous integration, CI/CD for code. You want to do CI/CD for everything. So increasingly infrastructure as a code, everything you build needs to be continuously deployed. You need to have faster feedback loops, higher velocity, continuous releases for everything. So how do you enable deeper and deeper into the platform the same ethos that has been built across the rest of the application stack?
One thing that really resonated with me that you said, DV, was around being operational leaders, right? I think it is so true today. I mean, the most successful leaders are today so hands-on. I think there was a big broha that happened because the Airbnb CEO said that the founder mode kicked in, and I think everybody in the valley is talking about it. But I think it's nothing but being operationally very savvy and in the details and very data-driven. Uh, and you talked about the impact on what's happening across the value chain. But let me start with the left. Like everybody's been focused and talking about and really excited about the dramatic velocity increases on the software engineering, software development life cycles, thanks to all the co-pilots that are kicking in and people are claiming, all kinds of productivity increase numbers. But nobody is talking much about what that implication means to the rest of the value chain on the right-hand side, right? So I'd love to get your perspective, DV. If left is increasing in velocity so much, what are the implications on the right-hand side, right? Whether it's CI/CD, whether it is DevOps, DevSecOps, platform engineering, deployment cycles, like how do you see that playing out?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things that are really important here. In order for that increase in velocity, what is also happening is each of those kind of teams on the left that are building their applications are increasingly owning bigger and bigger portions of the stack. They want to, you talk about embedded DevOps, embedded DevSecOps, quality within engineering. So the engineering team is responsible for everything, reliability, deployment, everything in their own stack. So and AI has also kind of made the skill gap smaller, so they can go deeper, do more across multiple clouds, and that obviously empowers those teams a lot, gives them autonomy, and makes them move faster. But the moment you have like 10 of those teams, or in Alteryx case we have 60 of those teams, the challenge for the platform and the infrastructure engineering becomes how do you kind of build governance without slowing them down, right? And the idea is how can you use AI or other mechanisms to provide golden paths or pre-baked paths that are governed that they can just use as is to provide kind of centralization of some sort, while at the same time leaving the right amount of knobs open, or in some cases provide some kind of an escape hatch where they can come in and extend what you're building for very specific use cases. So the more sophisticated your platform is, the more you will provide all of these at the same time. Golden paths, kind of governance for people who are trying to kind of use the escape hatches or go their own way, and as well as kind of the right kind of knobs and the right depth of knobs, right? And if you provide too many of those, then you increase complexity for those teams, and thus you need more skills on those teams. So that's the balance that we talked about. And I think, again, for example, StackGen and companies like yours are kind of trying to provide that core infrastructure that helps teams build out that right balance as a platform team. And this is a hard thing to build. It's complex with service meshes and security layers. And there's so many things that come into play in such a platform that it's a hard thing to build. The skill set needed is difficult. So finding the right kind of tooling and platform and building it is super important.
I mean, a lot of the things that you said, DV, definitely resonates with us. I think, the incubation and the beginning of StackGen, and that was our vision because, we believe like as a velocity goes up on the left, I think the right-hand side has to cope up and in fact be a more enabler and a seamless enabler of that increase and create more business impacts. In fact, you made a very good point saying that, look, the power is going to shift more and more to the left, to the creator, which is a software developer. I remember 10, 15 years ago, we used to have large armies of testers and QA folks, as big as the software development teams. And now that has shrunk quite a bit because we've moved to a full stack model, right? Our vision is obviously very big from a StackGen perspective. We believe eventually the developers should be able to deploy on their own when they want it at any point and on any cloud. And I think we are heading in that direction. Maybe, might take a couple of years to get there, but that's what we're trying to enable from a StackGen perspective. But I think then you made a very important point, which is really around the change management, right? It's also, there are so many things that have to fall in place: automation, enablement of AI, leveraging AI, change management, behavioral adaptation, the ecosystem of tools coming together and integrating in the right way. Uh, you know, you've gone through and you've built companies, you've done some significant transformations in your career with large companies and digital native companies. How do you see this playing out? How will this play out in your view over the next, let's say, 1 or 2 years? And what are the, if I may ask, the two biggest challenges for platform engineering teams, and how do they need to rethink how they approach the coming, changes or velocity of change that's coming at these teams?
Yeah. I think, so if you look at kind of what's happening or what's going to change, some of that we discussed, but we didn't talk much about AI. So maybe we spend a second on that.
Sure.
And I think there is both a question of automation with AI, so you can do more with fewer people. And so naturally with platform, it's both the automation on the left side, where the application team that are using the platform can go deeper, can do more with AI than they were able to do before, but it's also on the platform. So firstly, when you start thinking of platform as a product, you're no longer just kind of a ticket organization, right? Where you're getting requests and you're kind of servicing them and you are the bottleneck. You're an enablement organization where the work you're trying to push to the self-service engineering teams which are doing their own work, and it's almost like selling a product. Like I've been in a startup, you go to a company, you try to sell to them, and then you got to get adoption. So to get adoption, you need to do enough. You need to measure NPS scores, you need to measure experience, but then to get adoption, you need to do the right kind of change management. You don't get everything inbound from the company that you're selling to. Similarly, you don't get everything inbound from the teams that are trying to use your platform. You need to proactively influence them, and you need to proactively drive that change. And that non-code part of the collaboration communication is where I think AI will also play a big role, and not enough people consider it. In fact, at Alteryx, as we've tried to deploy AI, one of the areas we've really focused on is that piece, because that is the hard part of this, right? You make a change in your platform, you enable a new policy, you just become PCI compliant, and now you have to change the process and how these teams interact with you. And if you have a large number of these development teams, how do you drive that change and upgrade and all of that? And they have AI agents on their side. I think in the future, that communication and that rollout, so to speak, of new things and adoption of those new things will become much more automated, much faster. And the speed of communication to these teams to help them understand how they should change their behavior will also become faster, right? And so the challenge for the platform teams is you suddenly go from this team, which is so focused on doing your own thing, and just building your stuff and building it fast and building it well, to an influence organization where 60% of your job is building, but 40% of your job is kind of influencing the rest of the organization into how modern practices work. It's the whole concept of guilds or centers of excellence. In the platform team is kind of combination of a software team and a center of excellence. And so I think wearing those two hats at the same time needs different skill sets from the leaders. It needs different capabilities in the tools, right? These tools have to be used by both the parties. They have to have collaboration between both the parties, and so on and so forth. So I think that is one of the biggest challenge for these teams, to kind of build that skill set to be a product to have the product like thinking and mindset, and to drive adoption, kind of push adoption rather than wait for requests to come in, if that makes sense, Ash.
That absolutely makes sense, DV. In fact, it reminded me, I was running a fairly large software engineering organization, and we had to move from the traditional waterfall model to the agile way of working, and we divided everybody into small squads and guilds, etc. What you're talking about. I think the hardest part was the behavioral adaptation. The fact that the organization went from 13 layers to 7 layers, and everybody used to want a sort of hands-on operator leader, getting them to work in a way that we're delivering every 2 weeks. I think a lot of times people underestimate the softer aspects of change management and focus too much on the tooling and the deployment of the technology. And we are all engineers. We love new tools, new gadgets, and new technologies that come our way, but underestimate the change process that you have to go through. Coming to that, one of the things that we always see in fast growing digital native companies and even in large enterprises is a matrix structure, right? So you have the centralized teams, you have the decentralized business teams facing the market. And within technology itself, there is generally a horizontal team and a vertical team. DV, you have some very interesting perspectives on that. One is, how do you see that evolving over a period of time, right? Where do you think this will go? And what would you advise teams who exist in those kinds of structures to think about? Because my suspicion would be they also need to adapt, but in different ways. I mean, the past is not going to be a reflection or is not going to predict the future. But how do you see that? How have you experienced it? And what changes have you brought about as you went about thinking through moving to the next modern engineering world?
Yeah. I think firstly on this topic, I think the thing to remember is there is no right answer even for a single company. The answer changes over time, right? The answer is different for a 100% company versus a 200% company. The answer is different if you have only one product in the market versus you're a platform with 5 products in the market. The answer changes the moment you do an acquisition. So I think you have to understand that as a platform team, you have to understand that you have to build a platform that can provide different amount of flexibility between centralization and decentralization to different customers that you have. Some customers might be less sophisticated. You to be more centralized. Some customers might be much more sophisticated. Some are in a mature product, some are early products in their life cycle. It might be different as your company evolves. Many of them might be moving towards a bigger, more decentralized model. So I think it's really important to build a platform, and that's really where I think the conversation with you at StackGen is really important, where you can kind of tune those knobs to the right amount of right balance, depending on the relationship that the platform team is having with a different with the different teams that they're working with, right? And so there is no like global universal right balance for any team. The important thing is to build a way that any consuming team that is coming to your platform infrastructure is trying to use it is able to self-serve, self-understand, and self-regulate the right amount of balance, while you as the underlying central team can get a governance view in terms of metrics, but also in terms of usage and say, hey, this is really where we stand. This is the team that's going to need the most support because we are doing most of the work for them. This is the team that's going to need a very different kind of support around developer experience because they are able to go in and make a lot of changes themselves. And so you have a different conversation with those teams. And then you have to have the capability to follow through with all of those teams in the right way. So I think from a tooling perspective, you do need both the right amount of knobs for different teams, and you need kind of on top of the tooling the right people and processes to handle the various kinds of knobs. And the more sophisticated you are, the bigger you are as an organization, the more complexity exists here. And I think anything that can help simplify that complexity into kind of one simple thing will make it easier. And I think that's where the world is going, right? I think the more mature this area gets, you'll have continuous delivery, continuous releases across the platform. Even infrastructure, even security fixes are going out continuously all the time, separately for each team with independent deployments. That is the world you're going to. And then in that continuous world, different teams are going deeper into the stack and making changes in different ways. So I think that is really what a sophisticated platform looks like. Most companies are not going to be there. Most companies have to pick a golden line and then try to vary plus minus 10%. If you can vary plus minus 30%, you're already ahead, right? So how much can you go, the median you built, how flexible can you be is really kind of how I would measure how sophisticated your platform has become.
You made a very good point, DB, is, the whole sort of ability to dial up and dial down, right? In addition to what you're talking about for platform companies or SaaS companies, one of the biggest challenges is you sometimes have to deploy across multiple clouds. So, you have to, now the world is getting more and more, there are data residency requirements, there are local data, regulations that require you to keep your instance local, your data local. You want to be able to at the same time move at speed. And I know at Alteryx, you solved a lot of these problems in a very transformative way. Could you share with, how, for, maybe the startups or SaaS companies listening into, how did you solve this problem? Like, what were some of the big, strategic things that you did that gave you the velocity to be able to deploy across clouds, across regions, replicate it, meet the customer at the speed at which they were moving, or even probably leading the industry in that regard? Like, can you help understand what were some of those levers you pulled?
And I think, even at Alteryx, we've been on a journey where we've done some things and we've changed our mind, done other things and we've learned. I think we did start with a much more centralized model where we had a few teams focused on getting our software to deploy across multiple clouds. And we, for example, had a different repository for every cloud where we had infrastructure code for every cloud and so on and so forth. So tried to keep that complexity to a small number of teams. Then as that matured and more applications started to deploy into multiple clouds and infrastructure in our case, that complexity started to get exposed out to those teams. And then, there's a continuous debate in the organization around how much abstraction do we provide, make things simple for that team, and thus taking control on the on the on the central teams, the platform teams, versus how much do we let those teams self-serve and go deeper and push knobs. And what I find is that the more sophisticated teams want the knobs. They have the DevOps know-how and knowledge. They want to be able to change. They get frustrated when they get blocked by some golden version of the platform that they have to use, a chassis or something that has been built, and it kind of restricts them, versus they think if they just had the control, they would be able to do it, right? There are other teams which appreciate it because they really aren't a team who's focused on that kind of complexity. So again, I come back to the same point. I think where we are with Alteryx is we've kind of reached a point where a lot of different teams have started to use or get into deeper into DevOps and platform and started to run into those problems. And so our infrastructure team is, kind of actively thinking of kind of figuring out how to provide deeper self-service, deeper different kinds of balance for different teams. So some of the problems I talked about, we are in on the journey to build that kind of a flexible platform where different teams can go at different levels of depth, and the infrastructure team doesn't have to be a bottleneck. And we are actively also discussing how to solve the multi-cloud problem, which is a different dimension to the same problem where, as you go deeper into the stack, now you have to do everything 3 times because you have 3 major cloud vendors. So I wouldn't say we've solved the problem, but I think we definitely have deployments. The way Alteryx works is we have a core control plane, which runs on one cloud, and then we have all the data assets which are run, in whichever cloud vendor the customer is in, that's where their data is. So we have to manage hundreds of instances across all these customers for those deployments. So it's a pretty complex setup. And like I said, we are still balancing that out. But I think that the journey that I described earlier is the journey we've been on as well.
So a lighthearted question, DV, do you have any particular favorite cloud that you like?
uh, I think that's a tricky one. Right now, we are kind of a multi-cloud vendor, equally invested in all three clouds. So maybe I should stick to saying all three.
Okay, got it, got it. As you think about the journey for platform engineering, over the next 2 to 3 years, when I speak to CXOs, all of them are excited about AI, but they also have worries about AI, right? So from your vantage point, your, background and where you sit, what excites you about AI and what worries you about AI?
No, I think I'm a big believer in it. I do think that a majority of what I think about is how AI is about to transform how we build software, how we do engineering, and that is across all teams. So it definitely also applies to platform teams. And I think the biggest thing as you think about AI in any company, I think one of the things is there's kind of, I would say, two levels of what you can do. The first thing is to see what you're doing today. Can you do it easier, faster, and better with AI? And clearly, there are lots of opportunities, both in your ability to create, code, as well as to do things that you do outside of code, the whole SDLC process, and taking it and automating it and speeding it up. And as I said, especially around communication, how do you communicate, how the approval processes work, and things like that can be automated with AI. And so that was really the first part of our journey as we started thinking about this. We started to invest in that. But where I am spending most of my time right now is once you've done those things with AI, right? So if the nature of the engineer and what they can do and the impact a single engineer can have has fundamentally changed. You are now firstly, you increase the complexity of what a junior engineer can do. You increase the diversity of the different skills that they have. You have like these. I call this the ability to create 10x engineers. You have these engineers in every company who really are 10x engineers. They can dive into anything. They know the architecture. Imagine what you've done is you've taken every junior engineer and made them a 10x engineer. They understand the architecture really well. They understand all the code that you have that has been created. They understand best practices. And what happens when you have 200 10x engineers instead of 10 10x engineers and 190 great engineers, right? I think what has to change then is the way we think about what software means, how we develop, how we think of, for example, a trade-off between redoing software. Like, the fact that we have a platform at all is because we think doing it in one place is better than having everybody build out their own thing. I think with AI, you have to start thinking maybe a little bit more chaos is okay. If a little bit more chaos is okay, it will also result in a bigger governance load. So where I think things are going is what we have to start thinking about now is, okay, how is the complexity of what is being built, the quality of what is being built, the velocity of what is being built going to change? And in my opinion, it's going to be a lot more chaotic. It's going to be a lot more duplication from different teams. It's going to be a lot more variety of what's being built by different teams. And to truly leverage AI, I think you have to embrace it. You have to say that these teams are going to do everything in many different ways. And so I think the challenge on the platform and the central teams that are responsible for quality and governance is how do you then use AI in reverse to make sense out of the chaos, to find the outliers and the true exceptions, And instead of hard coding your governance and saying this is exactly how everybody should do this because this is what we've mandated, you start saying we're not going to mandate it that way, but we're going to understand using AI what you're doing. And if we don't think it's the right thing for the outcomes that we have agreed on, then I'm going to call that out and help you get to the right outcome. So what I really mean is, what I call like checklist based governance or golden image based governance, saying, hey, this is exactly what you do, versus AI based governance, where these AI agents can now understand, help you kind of make sense of that chaos, dive into the right pockets and change it, and then understand the requirements on the platform. So that is behavioral change, like you were describing. That is organizational change in a way that we haven't thought about before. And I think that's really the most exciting part over the next few years.
That's so reflecting of where we are. We started seriously evaluating and measuring how much productivity improvements and velocity we are getting because of co-pilots with our engineering team. And kudos to the StackGen team. We seriously rolled out Cursor, about 5 months ago to everyone. They were all using different co-pilots, and we wanted to sort of standardize and then sort of see where we are going. And we are seeing about 41% more commits in just a matter of 3.5 months. And each developer is, almost saying on an average, they are seeing 40 to 50% increase in their productivity, deployments. We're also tracking how many tabs do they accept when the suggestions come in so that we know which model's working better. So it clearly resonates and connects with what you're saying. I love your passion, DV, and thank you for taking so much of time. I want to get to the human behind the CTO and the career, that illustrious career that you have had. What makes you passionate outside of work? Your passion on work and technology is amazing, but what sort of motivates you outside of work? What are your passions?
I have young kids right now, so that takes up a lot of my time. We love to travel as a family. We were just in Peru. We had an amazing trip. We went to, the Peruvian mountains. We were in the Amazon jungle, so that was great. We travel a lot as a family. That's always been a passion of mine. I I read a lot, like many other people do. Generally, I think, with kids taking up most of my time, I've had to find a few little hobbies of my own. So, I think I've always been into kind of reading and video games and things like that. I don't get a lot of time to really finish any of these things, but I'll pick one or two up and play during my travel, or, I travel a lot for work. So sometimes during my travel, I try to catch up on reading or play some video games and stuff like that. So that's kind of my side hobbies.
So, DV, if you were to recommend, two, three very good books that, from your experiences and readings, which ones would you recommend?
When you sent me that before this call, I thought I'll just look up the last three that I've been reading up on my
Oh,
Kindle, and
yeah.
it turns out like the three of them are actually very, very different three books, which I hadn't realized. So there's this book called Seven Powers, which I've just started reading. I was at a offsite with a few startups and this recommendation came up, and really tries to understand kind of structural sources of competitive advantage for companies. It's a fascinating book. It talks about all the companies that have built really big moats. They really can't do it in five different ways, but they've tried to categorize a few different ways that the companies build these moats, what got them to those moats. And it has like fascinating stories of these really great companies that we know, Netflix, etc. So I'm loving that book. Another book I'm reading is called kind of The Dawn of Everything. I love these kind of broad scale history books that talk about everything from the dawn of man to like everything has happened today. And this is another very recent, very academically rigorous take on it, and really talks about kind of the history of thought really, and freedom, and how human thought has evolved. And with everything going on in the world these days, so much politically and otherwise, it's a very interesting look at kind of how all of that has evolved historically. And finally, on the fun side, I read a lot of science fiction and fantasy, and there's this kind of phenomenon these days, a very interesting book that has kind of taken the social media by storm, which I started reading. It's a multi-book series called Dungeon Crawler Carl, and I'll mention it. It's a really fun book with like a cat as one of the main characters, but it's a very unique kind of book that I hadn't read before. I've not read anything like it before, but there's a reason it's taken the world by a storm, and I'm loving it. So, yeah.
Oh, that's a lovely combination of different genres of books you're reading. So that's fascinating. It's Dungeon and Crawlers, Seven Powers, and what was the second one, DV?
It's called The Dawn of Everything.
Dawn of
Yeah,
Everything.
it's one of those kind of big history books that tries to tie up history from all the way from prehistory all the way to today, and in a single book paint the arc of human history and human thought really. And I think, yeah, it's a fascinating book in that sense.
So on that note, I think we got a very good, panoramic arc view of your life and your thinking process and your perspectives. Really enjoyed the conversation, DV. Thank you very much for taking the time today to share that with us. It's been really awesome, and wish you best of luck. And we'll see you soon again. Thank you.
Thank you, Asha. This was great.